So, do I think that we're living in a simulated reality? I don't know. I know that the question, or the answer is not even wrong. The idea that we are, like, what that means is that it's not falsifiable, which means that it's not science. I don't know, maybe we live on the top of a giant turtle. Maybe it's turtles all the way down. Well, if we live on one turtle, then the turtle has to be on another turtle, so it's a 1 in billions chance that there's only one turtle, so therefore it must be turtles all the way down. We can have these kinds of stupid discussions all day. Um, there's no real grounding anywhere in it. Maybe because the Earth looks kind of like the deprecated model of the atom, and sorry, maybe because the solar system looks like the deprecated model of the atom, and things revolve around the sun, then if we look down at a deeper level, then we'll see um, uh, solar systems all the way down, right? And I mean, gravity exists at all levels, so it's a 1 in billions chance that gravity. I mean, if you drop something, it's a 1 in billions chance that it's not going to fall, right? So therefore, it must be solar systems all the way down. In fact, we know that that's wrong because we've got these fancy microscopes nowadays, and we can look down and we can see that, right? It's not even. It's more that it's more that you're screwing with language than anything else, right? What was the word that they used to use in Greece? Um, for people that fucked with language in order to come up with stupid arguments, and they weren't actually philosophers. I've forgotten the word. It's a specific word. Somebody finds it. So if somebody finds it for me, post it here. I may find it before the end of this talk. This is not going to be too long a talk though. Um, his argument is not defined. So it's you can't. He says, "What's wrong with my argument?" It's not even wrong, right? You can't find a flaw in it. That doesn't mean it's right. In this case, it means it's not defined, right? We actually my analysis of things is that we're not going to see. I mean, the level of growth that we've seen here is not actually unique, right? We saw very fast growth rates in the classical world, um, and then we saw Dark Age, and I think that we think there were very fast growth rates around around the I'm going to say something here that's probably going to make a lot of people upset, but around the time that Homo sapiens met Homo neanderthalensis, let's just put it that way, around 50,000 years ago, give or take a few thousand years, we think there was a very rapid development of things like language that happened when we parked ourselves in the Levant. Um, And so that we see this, what we see is a pattern of rapid development and then stagnation, rapid development and then stagnation, right? That's what our growth curve actually looks like, and I think that's a very good thing that it does, because if we had infinite growth like that, well, it wouldn't look like that forever, right? It would look like that and then fall down like that, and he does mention something like this here, indicating that he is kind of aware of it. But he's missing that in recognizing that he's come up with the answer to his own quandary, right? I think that we have several brick walls ahead of us that are going to break the premise, right? People are suggesting that we've finished physics. I don't think we've finished physics at all. I think we've got to a point where the technology is taking us, we've hit a point where we can't get further, right? Our great science has led us to the conclusion that the world is largely random, right? Our great understanding is that we don't understand, right? And that's not a breakthrough. That's just a plateau, right? That means we're stuck for a while. It's going to be a long time before we get over this kind of quantum bump, right? And there's a lot of questions that are intertwined with it. Things like, what is the nature of space, right? The questions that we only really started to form a few hundred years ago, and that we really are only beginning to be able to even articulate now at this point, right? And it has a lot to do with how it is that we're able to manipulate physics at a very let's say granular level, right? I think there's this kind of popular perception that we understand quantum physics, right? Well, I mean it. You know the quote, right? If you claim you understand it, then you don't, right? But we're gonna have to figure out a way to understand it before we can kind of get past that, right? And I don't think that's gonna happen soon. I don't think we're gonna wake up one day and some genius is gonna tell us that, right? It's gonna be a lot of experiments, a lot of dead ends. Okay, we're gonna fuck up a lot before we get there. I'm gonna change my battery. I mean, the success of modern physics is not in our understanding of it, it's in our application of it, right? So we say this is right because it works. Not because we understand why it's right or how it's right or even how it works, but just because it does work. Here's just one example. Entanglement. The prevailing understanding of entanglement is that anywhere in the universe, the particles remain entangled. We don't know how it functions, we don't know why it does it. It just seems to break down every concept of physics that we have. And we're going to build a system, we're going to build an electronic system on something that we don't remotely understand. That sounds a lot less like what we think of when we think of science, and even less of what we might think of when we think of alchemy, and more of what we might think of when we think of, like, Dark Age magic. I might present a crazy idea. That if you take two entangled particles and you pull them out long enough, you'll find out that you can see, breaks in them. And there's no theory that underlies that. I just believe it's incredulous to me to suggest that you can take particles and separate them by thousands, millions of light years. At some point, we will take the particles far enough apart from each other that we will see gaps, and they won't behave exactly the same. And we'll have to come to the conclusion that, wait a second, there's something else going on here. I can't prove that, I can't even articulate it. But that's just exactly my point, right? And the way that we are approaching physics right now is more like the way that a magician would approach, the magical, substances, than it is like any kind of rigorous concept of science. And I think that if we continue to kind of barrel down that direction, that's what we're going to go through. We're going to go through a very long period of stagnation where we are just stumped. Okay? Where we just can't figure it out. And that's going to lead us into a period of quantum mysticism. we will become so perplexed by this that we will begin to worship it. Because we're not gods, and we're not evolving into gods. We remain stupid fucking monkeys that will react to things that we don't understand by elevating them to a higher plane. But infinite growth, no. Our history is not infinite growth. It's like a step function. Periods of very fast development and short bursts of very fast development, followed by long periods of stagnation. Right? 100 years of rapid fast development and 2,000 years of stagnation. That's our history. And we can cherry pick this little piece of the curve, right? It's like what Donald Trump did yesterday with the housing market. It's like what the global warming deniers do when they say that there's been no warming in the last 10 years. It's the same thing when you look at our graph over the last 50 years. You're saying, look how fast it is, but you're ignoring the broader picture, which is these long periods of stagnation. Okay. And if I was to guess, I mean, I don't know what I would have. Okay, let me be completely honest. If I would have lived 3,000 years ago, I probably would have been eaten by wild animals before I hit the age of 10. That's the actual truth of it. Okay, I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I would have. Or I would have been sacrificed to the gods. I would have been pulled out as the weakling child and sacrificed to the gods. Okay, I wouldn't have survived. I don't pretend I would have. But if I would have somehow, would I have been able to see it coming? Would I have been able to look at the society and say that your preoccupation with order is going to lead to the collapse of thinking and the enforcement of totalitarian states? Would I have predicted the Roman Empire? Would I have predicted the papal fundamentalism? Well, where would I have lived? I may have lived here in North America. I may have lived in the Middle East. I may have lived in Northern Europe. And so the premise is incoherent. Okay, but regardless, somebody alive at the time, and I'm sure that you can find it, right? Well, I mean, you've got the Stoics and the Cynics, right? I think they kind of saw it coming, but they rebelled in it. So I mean, I don't, I don't buy into this science fiction reality that we're on our way to the stars, and we're just gonna, this whole, whose law is it? Is it Moore? It's not even, Moore's law itself is not even wrong, right? But I mean, that's not what I see from my understanding of history and my understanding of the way that we're, hurling ourselves around the sun. Is that we've had, in fact, an unusually long period of growth, and we're due for decline, and we're due to stagnate because we always have before. Which I will acknowledge is itself somewhat of a fallacy of reasoning, but I think it's a better argument than cherry picking a section of the graph, right? And we can point at things like climate change or nuclear Holocaust. I don't think we need to go that far. I can envision us just floating, right? More like those films, those dystopic kind of films. I think maybe Idiocracy. Idiocracy is probably a better predictor. And I mean, like I said, of course, that is if we can avoid extinction or collapse in the next century. Idiocracy may be a caricature and exaggeration, but I think the basic concept it's probably a better prediction than Star Trek or whatever else you want to throw at me, right? But what does it say about how advanced species can react to technology? I think that the opposite of what he's saying is more plausible. Okay, what I think is that in order for a species to survive the invention of technology, its adoption rate would have to not outstrip its ability to adapt to it. So anytime you see a species with these really fast growth curves, that doesn't mean that it's just going to keep going up, right? Infinite growth is not sustainable. If we can kind of go back to that point that we've been arguing over here on the left forever, and more that what you see when you see a growth curve like that is the inevitability that it's going to fall. And we can be silly and point to rabbits, but we can also just use our faculties of reason and see that there's no real other way out, right? You can't get to infinity. That is, that a species that innovates at an exponential rate is all but certain to destroy itself. And that if we're going to envision advanced civilizations, their growth curves are going to look more like ours. And when I say that, what I mean is rapid periods of growth and then long periods of stagnation that allow us to adapt to that. And so maybe we could phrase it in those kinds of terms, right? We just went through huge amounts of evolution in 100 years. And it's going to take us generations to adapt to it before we can, if we want to successfully adapt to it. We're going to have to let our biology catch up to the technology. And that's going to take a long time. And so I might argue that successful adaptation to technology presupposes linearity, or at least, like I said, a step curve, right? Not, if you curve it over, you'll get a linear graph. But if you hone in on it a little bit more carefully, what you'll see is it's more like that, right? And so he says, we can either we will get to a point where we become a simulation, or we'll destroy ourselves in the process. Well, there is another option, which is that we never get to that point. because we need to slow down so much, right? Or, what I think is probably more likely is that we destroy ourselves before we get there. And that's why I think that, we're probably the counterexample to what he's saying, right? That even if we can get to that point where we can simulate reality like that, we won't. It'll be for a fleeting moment, right? But let's think about what he's saying a little bit more carefully here, which is what I'm, this whole not even wrong thing again. I pointed out the turtles all the way down thing. Here's another one. The odds of life evolving are 1 in billions. Therefore, life doesn't exist. So what are we? Obviously we do exist. In fact, the probability that life might evolve, given that life did evolve, is 1. So again, you're not defining like the when you say the odds of life evolving are 1 in billions. Okay, the odds of life evolving somewhere else are 1 in billions. But the odds that life did evolve, that's a 100% certainty that life evolved. Right? Now, a lot of people will, tell you that, well, okay, maybe the odds of life evolving are 1 in billions, but there's billions of, you know, billions of galaxies with billions of suns in those billions of galaxies and billions of planets around those billions of suns and those billions of galaxies. So to say that the odds of it happening are 1 in billions, well, there's billions, it's bound to happen. Okay, sure, but what that means is that rare events happen. And rare events happen all the time. And when you take that and you kind of look at that as kind of like a macrocosm of, I don't want to say microcosm, but as a macrocosm of existence, we realize that maybe we should not be thinking in the terms that he's suggesting that we're thinking in. That maybe that's not the right way to analyze things. The error is in interpreting probability as a physical law that exists in reality, rather than merely as a purely intellectual tool of analysis that only exists in our minds. So saying that there's a one in 100 billion chance that something will happen does not mean it won't happen. Because your analysis is not binding on the universe. To begin with, you could be completely wrong. Your calculation could be totally off. And the idea that you have enough information to create a probability of that sort is comedic, right? When you start talking about these probabilities of things like the probability of life occurring, you can at best interpret that as a joke, right? You cannot take those kinds of arguments seriously because you don't really know. I mean, I talked about billions of planets, but how many times did these atoms bump into each other? Over a couple of billion years? More than once a year, for sure. So these numbers don't actually mean anything. Listen, I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I didn't just wake up one day and come to this conclusion that math is kind of a sham. Okay, I went through a lot of schooling, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it and kind of, I know that this is going to kind of come off as somewhat of an anti-intellectual kind of a, but what I'm kind of pointing at you is a field of math. It's meta-mathematics, right? And actually, if you talk to mathematicians, I'm not talking about working physicists. I'm talking about people that have tenured positions in respected colleges and universities. They'll uphold what I'm saying, and they'll point out that this is a very common mistake that people make. Right? Is that they're not able to separate the model from reality. The model is not reality. It's just a model. And the deeper that you push into mathematics, the more you realize how everything is a model. There's a big problem in mathematics around Euclidean geometry. And we actually got to a point where some of the most important thinkers of the, 18th century and beginning of the 19th century were arguing that The only thing that's true is Euclidean geometry, and that has kind of warped our concept of things ever since, right? We have this idea of mathematics being the language of nature. It comes from a Kantian concept of Euclidean geometry. But we know today that geometry itself is just a model, and that mathematics is not the language of the universe. It's just a tool to analyze it with. But yet this, 18th century misunderstanding is still very prevalent. And when you start to get really, really fuzzy thinking is when you start mixing modern physics with classical philosophy, which is what's happening here. So stated differently, it's not the case that the universe somehow obeys the laws of probability theory. It doesn't. The universe doesn't give a fuck about your calculation. Okay? It's merely the case that we've invented the laws of probability theory to help us guess how the universe might work. And so the actual truth is that we have no reason at all to be surprised when the universe tells us that our arbitrary ratios are wrong. It tells our arbitrary ratios to fuck off and does what it pleases anyways. So even if you could define your 1 in billions properly, it still wouldn't mean anything. Because the universe is not bound by your mathematical calculation, no matter how thorough you think that it is. Put another way, probability it's an engineering thing, right? It's useful if you're an engineer, if you're a working scientist. But the only reason it's useful is because we don't understand the causal basis of things. If we understood how things actually work, then we wouldn't need this. And when you start talking about theory, when you get out of the realm of application, there is no real use for probability theory. All of those questions about, what, are there hidden variables? Or, what is entanglement really? All of the whole, the best guess approaches that we use probability theory to help us get to, and that work well enough in engineering applications, or at least up to this point too, because we haven't done anything complicated enough for it to break down yet. I mean, look what happens when we try to build a quantum computer. The probabilities, they lose their use when taken out of the application, right? This is a big part of the reason why I'm sitting in a room by myself on disability and trying to finish a musical career rather than working in the sciences because of this break, right? I don't have a lot of interest in calculating probabilities and guessing how things are going to work out. I want to work in the realm of, theory. I want to understand how things are. But unfortunately, the purely theoretical thinker is up against a really harsh brick wall at this point in history. And you can call me a quitter, but I don't. I don't see any use in flailing against the inevitable, right? I would like to contribute, to the base of knowledge of human history, but I think I have, given where I'm positioned in space-time, I think that I have more useful to contribute in the realm of art. And that is as true for the most distinguished scientists alive today as it is for anybody else. I haven't provided you with any reason why we don't live in a computer simulation. And I'm not going to because I can't. Because as I said, it's not even wrong.